Have you ever been finishing a project, but you procrastinate on it by doing something that's much more fun, but a lot less necessary? That's exactly where Suzie has found herself. Trying her hand at a bit of interior decorating, she was attempting to design a floor tiling pattern for her kitchen. Unfortunately, her ADD got the best of her, and now she's lazily pushing around square floor tiles. As she marvels at the mindlessly meandering tiles, a curiosity is conceived, culminating in a conjecture.
Using a variety of pretty tiles, she finds herself placing some smaller tiles above her largest tile, but finds the sides aren't long enough to reach. So she finds a pair of tiles that are just big enough to touch. She smiles to herself and, now intrigued, looks for larger tiles for her designs. She arranges them so that the corners can touch, and sees she has made a rather flat, obtuse triangle now. Any other longer lengths of tiles would create a triangle as well.
It seems evident to her that, to form a triangle, there is a restriction on the sizes of the smaller tiles. Can you see the relationship between the lengths of the two smaller tiles and the larger tile? If you said that the sum of the sides of the two smaller squares has to be bigger than the length of the third side, you would be correct. A plus B is greater than C. This is called the triangle inequality.
Suzie searches for larger and larger tiles, and the triangles she forms get taller and taller. The angle between the growing squares gets smaller and smaller. Eventually, she finds two tiles that are just long enough to make a right angle, and she continues through to make an acute angle. Lastly, she finds herself grabbing two squares that match her base square. Now the two tiles together are twice as big as her base tile. She retrieves the two tiles that sat perfectly on top of her large base tile, and it becomes clear to her that these are smaller than her base tile. A smile crosses her lips as another thought comes to her. If she can find two tiles that are smaller and two that are larger, are there two that are just right to cover the same space as her base tile?
Now surrounded by towers of tiles, Suzie selects squares to assemble and assess their areas.
With 3 tiles in tow, she finds that the 2 smaller tiles cover more area than the largest tile, so she arranges them to the left. She grabs another trio, and since the 2 smaller tiles do not cover as much area as the largest, she places them to the right. On her 3rd try, she finds 2 tiles that cover exactly the same space as the larger tile. She continues in this way, making triangles and organizing all the triangles she makes. She takes a step back to look at all the triangles she has created and notices something intriguing. When the 2 tiles covered more area than the base, they formed taller, more acute triangles. And when the 2 tiles covered less area, they made flatter, more obtuse triangles. Interestingly, when she was able to find a pair of tiles to cover exactly the same area as the 3rd tile, they formed a right triangle. She wonders if this is always true.
Suzie stops short of celebration. She delights in her discovery, but must proceed with deliberation. Pleased but pensive, she ponders a new perspective.
She is grabbing tiles with the intent to build a right triangle and determine whether or not the smaller areas add up to the largest area without calculating. Now best friends, she names her trusty squares Ada, Bob, and Cat, and writes the initials on each one. If the C square can cover the A square and B square perfectly, she will know this triangle aligns with her other findings. She puts them together to consolidate their areas, and begins to move the largest tile to see if she can show what she suspects is true. While doing this, she brings the C square back to where it was when she made the right triangle. She notices that if she slides it straight down from here, the topmost tip of the square exactly meets the corner of her A square. She finds this suspicious, and it strikes her that there are places where the A square and B square stick out, and places where the C square protrudes. She begins to put more A and B squares under the C square. Specifically, she is attempting to insert under the C square the parts of the A and B squares that she sees protruding. A pattern is emerging, and she feeds it more and more tiles. She notices that her C-square is still sitting on top of the other tiles and places more C-squares to join it. As she extends the tiling, she sees that each C-square covers the perfect pieces to make the A square and B square. In fact, anywhere she puts the C-square, she is able to tile the floor with C-squares that cover exactly the area of one A square and one B square. Here's another tiling. And another.
This infinitely repeating template of tilted tiles is called a tessellation. This particular tessellation is periodic and has a repeating unit, the A square stacked on the B square. And there is exactly one A square for every B square. When the C square tilts to make the right triangle, it touches the same place in each repeating unit, and this cuts the pattern into pieces that make exactly one A square and one B square.
She is fascinated by this, so she grabs two other squares and begins to build the same pattern. In fact, she is able to do this with any two squares she finds. Picking her two favorite colors, she finally gets to work. It is growing dark outside, but before she knows it, she has tiled the whole floor.
Suzie's distracted detour has directed her to what's known as the Pythagorean theorem. In a right triangle, the sum of the areas of the two smaller squares always equals that of the larger third. Through simply playing and pondering, Suzie learned a little bit about the A's and the B's and the C's. Throughout the centuries, thousands of budding mathematicians have wondered the same things as Suzie. Sometimes, the most important mathematical discoveries stem from natural curiosities about the world around us. A great math teacher once said, "If all of your conjectures are right, you aren't making very good conjectures." When you're making hypotheses, do so with an eye towards putting the pieces together, and not so much on being exactly right. Take a step in what feels like a good direction. When you get to the truth, if it surprises you, take note. So, ask questions, make guesses, and most importantly, stay curious.